Welcome. So good to see all you guys. My name is Katie Clark. I am a member of the Altadena Library District Board of Trustees, and I am excited to be here with you guys today. I ran for office for the first time in 2018 and went through the experience of trying to figure all of this out by myself for the first time, and it was a huge undertaking, and I never want anybody else to have to suffer the way that I did. So I hope that today we can at least talk through some of the logistics that are a little bit confusing. Jason.
Good morning, everyone. Jason Capel, also one of the trustees for the library district. 2018 was also my first time running for office. I've worked for a labor union for almost 18 years, and what I'll say is, even being able to rely on the insight and support of the political department at my work, this was still a huge learning curve for me. So I want to just really thank Katie for putting this presentation together and kind of leading on this. I wish somebody had done this for me before I ran, that's for sure.
Okay, so we're going to jump right in. Like I said, the goal is to move through all this information and hopefully leave most of our time for questions. And I'm going to do my level best to finish by 12:50 by 11:50, so all of us can bounce to the next thing. So let's jump right in. The first, I think, thing about running for office is it is daunting if you've never done it before, but entirely achievable. And the most important thing to think about is what your motivation is for running, and whether that's something you know now or whether something you're just beginning to explore. I think all of us come from a similar place, and that's a place of care. So there's this old saying in politics that you either run because you have ambition or because you're mad about something. So either because you want to be, a senator or president, or because somebody knocked over your garbage cans with the truck one too many times and you were like, that's it, I'm going to do something about it. I think both of those are oversimplifications, and what we've seen in the cycles, certainly since 2008 and even more since 2016, is that more and more people are stepping up and realizing what an impact they can have at the local level. And so this is really about running for local office, which is a different animal entirely from running for state or national office. Those are different, sort of much more expensive, complicated campaigns. But running for local office is something I think that all of us have easily within our grasp. And I think we underestimate sometimes how many people there are. So there are almost 500,000 elected officials in the US, and most of these are local officials. So that's everything from school and library boards, county and city councils. In California, we have a lot of what are called special districts. Lots and lots and lots of different ways to be involved and make an impact at the local level. One of the things that really frequently happens for local office, because it's not something that's always super well understood, is that a lot of times those elections are unopposed. So somebody will run and there will be no opposition. If you've followed our library board races in the past, that was really common, where people would run unopposed. In 2018, when Jason and I ran, that was definitely not the case. And I am a firm believer that the more people are on the ballot, the better it is for all of us. It ensures a better conversation, a more democratic process, more participation, and it gives voters a real choice. And I think that's really critical. So in every circumstance, having more people participating in this process is definitely better. It's better for voters. It's better for the community. And in thinking about local office, having local expertise is critical, because unlike a lot of the stuff we see at the national level, a lot of local elected work is just getting things done and solving problems. And it's no different from being a community organizer or working on a PTA or solving problems in other situations, except that there are, some more rules and regulations you have to follow. But people who are coming from the community that they serve know how to solve problems and bring with them very specific sets of relationships that make them really good at doing exactly that. The impact that you can have in a local elected office is huge. right? Even if it seems like a small or like unimportant thing, you are making decisions about policy, about budget, about real things that impact people's lives and that impact your community directly. And I mean, I don't want to speak for Jason, but one thing that I've really found so rewarding about serving on the library board is the ability to have a seat at the table and make decisions and be in conversations where it really does impact people's lives, not just folks who are on our staff or who are, you know, in our volunteer base, but our broader community. And thinking about how we can really live some of those values that we care about is a really rewarding thing to do. So I want to go through three big categories, and Jason, I'm going to ask you to just jump in at any time and sort of back me up or correct me, or if you see anything that we're missing. Three kind of big categories to think about how to get started. So I think deciding to run is obviously the precursor to all of these. Once you've decided and you know, like, I want to run for office, I've identified what it is that I want to run for, I know when I want to do it, this is really the next step. And if you're still in that thinking about it phase, that's totally fine, right? Think about it, think about it, think about it, take your time, talk to people, go to meetings, be involved. But when you do decide that you're ready to make the jump and show up on that ballot, this is where some of these steps really come in. And knowing what they look like ahead of time may also help you with that decision-making process, because it does take a little bit of time and organization, but if you know what you're doing ahead of time, no problem.
And I'll just echo that, Katie. I'd been toying with playing for a while and then decided to jump in right before I was traveling out of the country, and essentially had to get everything done in Norwalk in one day, which was not fun. And you know, there's a lot of decisions you have to make. I know, Katie, you're going to get into some of that throughout the presentation, but if you're thinking of running, no matter what, for what seat, you know, start looking into it well before the August 7th deadline. Start making some of those decisions, you know, really researching everything through the Fair Practices Political Committee, so that when you do finally file, you've already got everything ready to go.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice. And, you know, all of the stuff that we're going to talk about today is designed to make your life a little easier, because I think the take-home message for absolutely everybody, whether you're on this call or watching later, is your voice is super important. It really matters that you're in this process. And so if we can help make that a little bit easier, that's what we're here to do. And I'm sure both Jason and I are happy to obviously answer questions today, but in the future as well, as things come up, if we can help you, we would be happy to. Neither of us are lawyers, neither of us are campaign experts, but at least we've been through the process once. So for all of us who live in LA County, the first place you're going to want to head to is the LA County Registrar Recorder's website. I talked to them on the phone yesterday, so this is sort of the latest and greatest information. Obviously, coronavirus pandemic is impacting the way everything happens. In the past, you would just go down in person and do a lot of this, but because that's less possible now, there are some slightly different procedures. So when you go to their website, which is lavote.net, at the top you'll see a little bar with all this stuff. Hover over voting in elections and then go down to running for office. And this is going to be your first step. You're going to want to come here all the time. It seems like you would go to elections, but that is not correct. You will get lost in the elections thing and nothing will happen. So you're in candidate and measure information running for office, and that's where you want to be. The first thing you have to do is qualify for the ballot. And what that basically means is you have to meet the qualifications for the particular office that you're interested in running for. I'm going to use the Altadena Library District Board of Trustees as an example a lot of times through here, but these are applicable to school board, to PCC college, you know, board of trustees, for water boards, for pretty much anything that's not a state office. So if you're running for state legislature, some of this stuff is the same, but some of it's a little bit different. All of this is true for anything below that level, so county and local offices. So for our board, the qualifications are pretty simple. You have to live in the district and you have to be a registered voter. And most of the time that's what the qualifications look like. It's not super complicated. The first thing you have to do is fill out what's called a CRQ, a candidate registration and qualification form. Now, in the past, you had to go in person and do that, but right now you can't, so you can do it online. So once you go to that voting and elections running for office page, you're going to see this sidebar, all kinds of really good information. But if you go all the way down to candidate registration and qualification, you can fill your CRQ out online. And you'll see that you have a window for the 2020 election. That's going to be true for every election, right? So there's always a filing window of about the same time. And then there's always an election window after filing ends between then and the ballot. So you'll see here the filing window is July 13th through August 7th. So anytime in there, you can pull your papers and start this process. After August 7th, if you haven't completed the process, you will not appear on the ballot. So that's sort of the hard stop. So all this is really straight ahead. You just fill it out. And what you'll see at the end of the CRQ is it'll ask you how you want to get your nomination papers. And that's the next step after the CRQ. So basically the CRQ is you saying, yes, I live in the district. Yes, I'm registered to vote. And you authorize the LA County Registrar to double check and make sure that's true. They double check, it turns out to be true. And then you get nomination papers either mailed or emailed to you. You can also make an appointment to go down to the registrar's office in Norwalk and pick them up. When I talked to them on the phone yesterday, they said that you need to make an appointment to do that because they only can have a limited number of people in the building at any one time. So I would say my experience with them is they're actually really willing to help. This number, I'll throw it up later, but this 815-2666 option 4, I called yesterday and I got a real person on the line immediately. And I just asked her like, hey, how is nomination working? How do we do it? She talked me through it. She guided me through the website. So always feel free to just give them a call and they will help you. I would say get those nomination papers emailed so you can kind of move through the process more quickly, because then you've got a couple more hoops to jump through in the next phase. So part 2 of this, once you've qualified, so that's not an official filing, it just says you're a qualified person to proceed to candidacy. Then you get a 2-parter. It's an application for nomination documents and a declaration of candidacy. And we'll look at those. These are all, again, pretty straight ahead, right? So it just says, you know, who are you? Where do you live? What office are you running for? Most local offices are nonpartisan. So library board, certainly, school board usually, those are nonpartisan offices. So you don't have to run as a Democrat or Republican and independent. You just run and they're a nonpartisan election. As you go further up in the process and you get into like, again, state and national offices, that becomes a party-driven process. But at the local level, mostly it's a nonpartisan situation. It just asks for a lot of contact information. It's not super complicated. And you fill out all of this information. You sign the oath of office, which basically, you know, is the thing that people say when they get sworn in about how you're gonna follow the rules and uphold the Constitution and not be a terrible person, basically. So you do all of that and say that all of your information is true and correct. Once you've done that, you then have to put together your ballot designation. And what that is basically how you want your name to appear on the ballot. So you usually are going to use your name and then you get 3 words that describe you, right? And there are a lot of rules about what 3 words you can use, right? So you can't say like, Katie Clark, amazingest candidate ever. It has to be like true and accurate and verifiable information. So if you're an incumbent, if you're already an office holder, you can say like, if I were running right now, I could say like Katie Clark, Altadena Library trustee, right? And if you're not an incumbent, you usually say something about your profession or who you are, or something that helps voters understand you a little bit. So do you remember what your ballot designation was, Jason?
I put down that I was a union organizer.
Yeah, I think I said small business owner. If I can't really remember. I can go back and look. But you know, you want to pick something that basically communicates to people what your background is, where you're coming from. You'll see on the ballot designation worksheet, it tells you, you can say your principal profession or vocation. You can say, you know, PUSD parent/teacher. You can say, you know, whatever it is that sort of helps voters understand who you are. If you were appointed to an office, so for example, like maybe you were appointed to a vacancy, you can say like appointed trustee or appointed board member. You can say incumbent, you can say whatever. There's a lot of rules. as with all of these things, just read the directions over and over and over and over and over again, and really give yourself time, because it's sort of like doing your taxes. Like once you get the hang of it, you know where things go, but the first time you'll read it and you'll go, what? Okay, and then you read it again and eventually you get there. And like I said, you can always call the registrar on that number and they will also help walk you through it. The final piece of this filing process, and so this is all just to appear on the ballot, right? So all of this up through step number 4 will get you on the ballot. So you would want to do all of these things before August 7th. That is the filing deadline. The last thing, number 5, your ballot statement, that is optional. So you guys know when you get that sample ballot in the mail, you flip through it and you see it, and then usually there's like some stuff where people will say, I'm, you know, so-and-so, and I'm running for this office because I, you know, have all these reasons and qualifications, and that's why you should vote for me. So you have the option to submit a ballot statement that goes to every single registered voter in their sample ballot. You don't have to. What I will say is that if you are planning to do this, it is very helpful because everybody gets a sample ballot. So it is a way to reach every single voter in your district, in your constituency. It is unfortunately not free. So you have to pay to do this. When we ran, it was, I think, $600 to do it in English and $600 in Spanish. So if you wanted to do both languages, it was $1,200, which is like a substantial amount of money. You know, that's one of those things where some people decide it's worth it. Some people think it's not. I decided to do it just because I wanted to make sure I had a chance to at least say hi to everybody in the district. But, you know, $1,200 is no joke. So
I think the one other way to think about it is, at least for the entire voting district of the Altadena Board of Trustees, for you to do a mailer to everybody on your own, just a little postcard size thing, is probably going to run you about $10,000. So the other way to think about it is for $1,200, you're already getting mail to every household. And if you're running for anything other than the district, the cost is based upon how many voters are in whatever area you're running for.
that's right.
So if you're running for something statewide, it's going to cost you infinitely more. If you're running for something smaller, it's going to cost you a lot less. So even, you know, I know we're moving towards creating districts for the library board, not this November, but I think 2 years from then.
Mm-hmm.
So for whoever ends up running, once that's in place, those costs will be lower.
Yeah, yeah, that's a really good point. And by way of reference, I think we have something like 34,000 registered voters in the Altadena Library District. So that's sort of, if you have a comparable number of voters, that cost will probably be pretty similar. And the registrar sets it. And again, it's based on what that number of distribution is. So you can call them and find out what the cost will be for your particular election. It varies depending on the position. Most local offices are either unpaid or there is a very small amount of compensation. So like, for example, library board, we don't get paid anything. PUSD board, I think they get a minimal honorarium. It's like $400 or something. I don't know how often they get it, but it's pretty minimal. Same thing like Pasadena City Council. I know they get a small amount of compensation, but you know, this is one of the, I'm not going to get on my soapbox now about the way money and politics intersect, but this is one of the reasons that a lot of people don't run for office, because it's like a lot of work, a lot of expense. And then once you are in the office, if you are working a full-time job or you're a parent or anything else, like it's not like you get compensated for your time. So that's something you want to think about. I mean, I appreciate public service deeply, but sometimes it does really seem to me to be pretty unfair for the amount of work that people put in. It's an important question. I will say that town council functions differently. So because town council is not a legislative body, you don't have to do any of this stuff. Their elections don't appear on the LA County ballot. They have their own ballot. None of this is applicable for town council. You can just do your thing. And I know that there are internal regulations and internal processes that are set by council, but that's separate from all of this. All of this is a legislative body, which means like its boundaries exist and are set by LAFCO. That means it has a budget, it has legislative authority to do certain things, usually some sort of revenue stream, or either spending or accruing tax dollars in some way, shape, or form. So that's what all of this applies to. Town council is a little bit different. I will say for a library board, there's no discussion about paying us. We're trying to fix our buildings and do other things. We don't need to pay our trustees.
Yeah.
No, that's like illegal. You can't get special treatment or privileges. I mean, it's gonna sound really cheesy, but like I get a deep personal satisfaction from doing the work that I do.
Okay.
Like it honestly, it just matters to me. I see how hard everybody works, and I know that the motivation is definitely from a place of public service.
And I think, unfortunately, at least on the local level, in my opinion, we saw what happened with the library board when people weren't participating, weren't engaged, and weren't paying attention. And so, like Katie said at the beginning, the best thing that can happen for any local body is for the maximum number of people to be involved, for lots of people to run, right? Because it forces community conversation, it forces community engagement. And I think by going through that process, you do end up with the most committed folks, rising to the top and staying involved and putting in the time after they are elected. Because it's, I think all of us, at least on this board, put in way more time outside of the monthly meeting that people see online than those couple of hours. So, it is a commitment. And so I think all of us have personal reasons and motivations, and the reward, like Katie said, is really just being able to have a positive impact on your community.
Yeah, it's really true. So again, as you go through this process of filing your paperwork to appear on the ballot, get used to calling our friends at the registrar's office, because they will give you, guidance on anything that you have questions about. They will help you if you're trying to figure out where something gets filed, or if you can email it, or if you have to mail it and when it has to be postmarked by. Like they'll help you. So just call them. If you don't get a good answer, wait a minute and call them back. Like you'll get somebody else. It's great. So the second part of this that I want to walk through briefly is the campaign finance piece. So that is all in order to appear on the ballot, right? So you did it. You're on the ballot. You filed all your paperwork. It's August 8th and you're feeling good. You're on that ballot and you're going to show up for voters in November. And now you have to think about how you're going to run this campaign. So again, not lawyers. This is not legal advice. This is our sort of best version of how to do this. And in the same way that the LA County Registrar is sort of the oversight body for all of us running for local office in LA County, there is a group called the Fair Political Practices Commission in Sacramento that handles campaign finance. Some of that intersects with the local registrar and some of it doesn't. So some of the stuff has to be filed in Sacramento, some of the stuff has to be filed here. There's a lot of forms. So we're going to talk about these, but my biggest advice is like, do not panic. It is not as bad as it seems, and we will go through it and figure it out. So this, when you go to the FPPC website, it's fppc.ca.gov. Again, you'll see a ton of stuff. You want to go to their Learn tab. And when you see that, you'll see like the rules and the forms and where to file and when to file. And they've got videos on things. Like they are trying also to make this accessible. When you see this list of forms, you're going to have like a little heart attack and you're going to go, oh my God, I don't know. What am I supposed to do with all these forms? I don't even understand that. That is entirely reasonable response that we have all had. So pick yourself up off the floor and then ask yourself one question. Do you plan to spend or receive more than $2,000 during the course of your campaign. This is a bright dividing line that the FPPC has in place. And the basic rationale is if you spend less than $2,000, they're really not that worried about it. It's just not that critical. So you can kind of do your thing, and that's either $2,000 of your own money or $2,000 of money that people contribute towards your campaign, right? Less than $2,000, you fill out a form 470. More than $2,000, we're in a different universe, and we'll talk about that in a second. So if you are planning to spend less than $2,000, you fill out this form 470. You can get a copy on the FPPC website, and every single one of these campaign finance forms works basically the same way, and it will look a lot like, you know, your IRS forms. They're kind of similar. Who files it, exceptions to that rule, any other stuff, when to do it, where to do it, extra information. So you always want to look at who, because you want to make sure that this applies to you. So office holders and candidates who do not have a controlled committee. So basically people in the more than $2,000 camp are going to have a campaign committee. We'll talk about that in a minute. Less than $2,000, this is you. You're a candidate who doesn't have a committee, doesn't think you're going to get or spend more than $2,000 during the calendar year. And so if you're thinking about running in, let's say, like a March primary, remember that that's calendar year. So that would be like if you filed in December, that would be one calendar year, and then the following year would be another calendar year. So just think about your math that way. That's an optional expense, right? You don't have to do that.
Okay.
You can do it if you want. You don't have to do it. The process of filing to appear on the ballot is basically free. I think you may have to pay a filing fee. I can't remember, honestly. But if you do, it's pretty nominal. It's like 30, 40, 50 bucks, something like that. And what you'll see is that in this $2,000 threshold, they say the candidate's personal funds for the filing fee or statement of qualifications are excluded. So I don't know if the 2,000 includes the ballot statement. I think it does, because I think that's a separate expense. Like that counts towards it, right?
Yeah, no, I remember reporting it on my first
yeah, I reported it too. So so that if you decide to do that ballot statement, either the 6 or the 12 or whatever it is, that does count towards your $2,000. That's still okay, right? Like you can get all the way up to $1,999. If you get money from anybody, from your neighbor, from your mom, from your friend, from your dog, you have to have a campaign bank account. You cannot put contributions in your own bank account. It is illegal. It's a big problem. So if you expect to ask people for contributions, which you definitely should, right? You just set up a campaign bank account, and you can go to the bank and you can tell them that you're running for office, and you can, we can talk about how to do that in a minute, but basically you set up an account and you put all the money that gets contributed in that account, and it stays totally separate from your personal money. And that's pretty important. Again, you'll see when and where to file. Go ahead. Say what?
If you want to get extra complicated, you can do what I did and take out a personal loan to help pay for some of it.
And you have to fill out Schedule C on the 460.
Yep, which is a whole other,
don't want to do that.
Just be prepared. This is part of why I said earlier, making the decision to run as early as possible, right? Because I was almost forced to do that because I jumped in late, hadn't even tried to do any fundraising yet, and just needed resources to take care of all of this stuff. So that's another reason to think about all this ahead of time, right? Because you can start doing the fundraising long before you formally file as an example.
Yeah. In a lot of ways, the filing process to appear on the ballot and the campaign finance pieces are totally separate pieces, right? You could open a committee now that said, John Lynch for PUSD board, and you could fundraise for 5 years before you decided to actually file. You would have to report all the way along, and like file reports with the FPPC, but you can do that. And people do that all the time, like especially people who know they're going to like run for Congress or president or stuff like that. They'll have fundraising efforts for years before they start the filing process. For a local office, you really don't need to do that. But I think Jason's point is well put, that like you want to have a sense of going in, like how much money you think you're going to need, how much time you think you're going to need to get there, how that lines up with the filing in the election window, just so you sort of thought through it, because trying to think through it in real time as November is like bearing down at you can be a little stressful. Totally doable, but just like, you know. And there are contribution limits for some offices, and there are also filing requirements. So like, we'll talk about this later, but any contribution that you receive that is over $1,000 has to be reported within 24 hours. It's fine, right? Like, it's fine. It's great. Somebody gives you $1,500 bucks. That's awesome. You put it in that bank account, you go on about your way. If you are under the $2,000 limit, right? Let's say somebody gives you $1,700 bucks, right? And you filed a Form 470, you say, I don't expect to raise or spend more than $2,000, fine, you don't have to report anything. Basically, if you're under the $2,000 limit, you file a 470 and that's it. That's the end. Congratulations. Like, you should still track and, you know, expenses and contributions, because as time goes on, you might end up spending or receiving more than $2,000. And if you do, that's fine. You file a 470S, which is a supplemental form that said, whoops, I went over $2,000. I didn't think I would, but I did. How's it go? And then you go into the other set of forms, which is what we're going to talk about now, right? So all of these things are solvable problems. You just want to sort of think ahead.
And the other thing to think to also know too, and this is just about keeping very, very detailed records. And I would say, you know, make sure you set up some kind of system that works for you before you start all of this to track everything. Katie, I forget if it's $50 or $100, but any individual contributions over a certain amount, you have to report those individual people in your filing.
It's 100. It's 100. You have to report every dollar that gets contributed. So now we're in the more than 2,000 scenario, right? So you want to track everything, whether somebody gives you $10, $20, $100, doesn't keep track of it, know who it was, when you got it, what it was. You want to avoid cash. So don't take cash contributions. The FPPC doesn't like it, and it's impossible to track, right? So you want checks, or you want online donations, something with an actual record. So if there's ever any issue, you can always have a paper trail that proves that what you're reporting is what actually happened. With cash, obviously, that's impossible to do. And you can't tell anybody where it comes from. So if you're in this more than $2,000 situation, this is the set of forms you got to file. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on each of these. If you have specific questions about any of these forms, we can talk about it. The 470S, that's the, whoops, I went over 2,000. Then you go to the top and you just go down. So the 501 is, I intend to ask for and receive contributions. It's just a statement of intent. The 410 is how you set up your campaign committee. And what you would have is called a candidate controlled committee. And that basically is a campaign committee that exists. It might have a membership of 1, which is you. That is totally normal. You can serve as your own treasurer. You can run your own committee. It's basically just a legal entity that exists separate from you, the candidate, but it's called a candidate controlled committee because you're the one making decisions. That's different from like a lobbying committee, or like, you know, in election years where you hear like paid for by Yes on M. That's like an issue committee versus, you know, paid for by Friends of Gloria, right? That's a separate kind of thing. You are doing a candidate controlled committee, which is usually like, you know, Jason Capel for Library District Board of Trustees 2020 or whatever it is, right? It's you, the office you're running for, and the year you're running in. So a 410 basically sets up that committee, and then the FPPC assigns you a committee ID number. So you got to do this. You have to what's called qualify, which means you've reached that $2,000 limit, and either in contributions or expenses. So as soon as you cross that $2,000 threshold, you've qualified as a committee. You also file this form again when you're ready to shut it down. So at the end, after your campaign is over and you've won and you're in office and you've cleaned up all your records, you shut down your committee and you file that 410 again as a statement of termination. The 460 is what Jason was talking about earlier. This is how you report contributions, expenses, loans, non-monetary contributions. This is basically your tracking spreadsheet that you send to the FPPC. And so you must account for every single dollar that you receive, and every single dollar that you spend on this campaign. That's why having a separate bank account is critical, right? What you don't have to do is itemize. So you only have to itemize contributions or expenses that are over $100. So if you get 12 contributions and all of them are for $10 and then one of them is 150, you would report, 120 plus 100, I don't know, whatever the math is, the sum of all of that. And then you would say itemized on Schedule A of your 460, this person, their address, their occupation. So you don't have to itemize every single thing, only things that are over that $100. Same for expenses. You itemize any expense that's over $100. And then this 497 is the one we talked about briefly. If you receive a single contribution, either on its own or in the aggregate, so maybe somebody gives you $400 and then they give you $700 in the same month, that's a total of more than $1,000. You have to report that within 24 hours. Again, you can always call the FPPC for advice, for information, for help. They have designated a specific advice assistance line, and they will help you. They will tell you what to do and how to do it. They are there to make this less stressful and less difficult for you. Try to really spend as much time as you can reading the directions on these things. Some forms have to go to the Secretary of State. Some go to both the Secretary and LA County. Some are just LA County. So really read that where to file, when to file stuff. I'm not going to dive into all of these, but again, you'll see that they have the same format. And as you go through this process, if you go in the order we talked about, it shouldn't be too difficult. When you get to stuff like this, you'll say, this is my initial filing, I'm not yet qualified, or it's my initial filing and I qualified, I crossed that $2,000 threshold on this date. Maybe it's an amendment, you have to correct something, or maybe your campaign is done, it's a termination and you're filing that last one. You'll put in your committee name, so, whoever for office, year, your home address, jurisdiction where you are, the treasurer. Now you can have somebody who is also responsible as a treasurer, or you can be your own treasurer. I was my own treasurer, it's totally fine. People do it all the time. If you have somebody who wants to assist you as a volunteer in that role, they have to sign all these forms too. Also totally cool, whatever works best for you. It varies person to person. And then on this 460, most of what you'll use are the Schedule A and the Schedule, I think, E. So Schedule A is where you report those contributions, right? The date you got it, who it came from, the street address and the zip code. Was it an individual, committee, other, party, small contribution? Almost everything you get is going to be an individual contribution. If it's an individual, you have to list their occupation and their employer. How much in this filing period, there are different filing periods, how much year to date, and you just fill all this stuff out. You can attach as many pages of a Schedule A as you need. And then you do this itemized thing at the bottom, total, unitemized, all of this that goes on a summary. Again, it is really a lot like doing your taxes. You just have to put multiple things and then they're subtract line 4 from line 5 and put that on Schedule B, and takes a minute. Schedule E is where you itemize, again, your expenses. So maybe you paid the registrar for that $1,200 ballot statement. You would say LA County Registrar Recorder, ballot statement, $1,200. Same deal. If it's less than $100, you don't have to itemize. The 497 is that $1,000 contribution, and you can file that online. And some of these forms, you can also email them, and then you send a copy by mail. I did that a lot because I was always a total last minute Lucy. So I would fill out my stuff, and then it would be the day it was due. I would scan it, I would email it to the registrar, and then I would go and get it postmarked. So at least it was postmarked by the due date, but they had a copy electronically as well. So you can always call them and figure out what makes sense. And some of the filing may be a little bit different. Again, because of the pandemic, you may be able to scan or fax copies in addition to mailing them. So these are some dates to bear in mind. I'm aware that we are quickly approaching the end of our time, so I'm going to be quick here. But basically, July 31st is a semi-annual filing deadline. If you already had a campaign committee open, you would have to file a semi-annual statement. If you don't have one, don't worry about it. It doesn't apply to you. And these are campaign finance filing deadlines, which is different from your ballot qualification deadlines, because why would this be simple and why would they have the same deadlines? Why? September 24th is the deadline for everybody on the ballot. So once you qualified, you did your A and B nomination, you know you're going to be on that ballot. By September 24th, everybody has to file either a 460 or a 470. So that's the point where you've got to make that game time determination. If you're filing a 470, that's that less than $2,000 category, you can file it whenever, right? But it has to be done by the 24th. If you're doing a 460, you also have to make sure you've done that 501, the 410, and the 460. So all of those things, you can do them all together. It's not the end of the world, but it is easier if you've got your like campaign ID number. So the sooner you do that 410, the easier your life gets. For the 460, the election statement covers the period from July 1st to September 19th. So you're reporting any contributions or expenses received or undertaken in that time. The second set is our second pre-election statement, and that's October 22nd. And that's from September 20th to October 17th. And then there's a semi-annual one after the election that you have to file that goes through December 31st so that you report that last little bit. After August 5th, that's the deadline where you've got to do that 497 within 24 hours. If it's before August 5th, you just put it on your semi-annual statement. It's not a big deal. After August 5th, which is, you know, you will have filed by then. So it's basically when you're in that election window, you've got to do that 497 reporting. And again, always go to that FPPC website. They've got all the dates. They've got all the forms. You can download them. You can fill them in electronically. You can print them. You can do what you need to do. But like, ask them for help. Ask us for help because it is a process, but it's not impossible. So I'm going to stop the screen share right there and open it up for questions. I'm happy to stay on a little bit longer. I know people probably have to bounce. So, but I'm good to be here for a little bit longer than our designated, and Jason too. Okay, great. So questions. Yep.
Oh,
Yep.
wow.
Yeah, they're serious about it. The thing is like you can always correct your mistake, right?
Mm-hmm.
So they always will give you an opportunity to fix it. And not everything is a like monetary penalty. Like I filed some stuff in, I can't remember when, like the second election window, and I put the wrong date on the top. I had the period date wrong, and they sent it back to me and they were like, fix this, and I fixed it. There was no penalty. They were just like, please make it right, and I did. If you do other things, then you get charged. So like there are penalties for various things, but they will also tell you, like they'll send you mail once you're in this process and they'll say like, hey, these forms are due by this date. If you don't do it, it's $10 every day until you do, or whatever the amount is. I can't remember. Yeah, it's like they're not joking around.
Mm-hmm.
They take it pretty seriously.
They treat you the same as any much higher level candidate. Like the laws aren't different, the penalties aren't different, right?
That's right. That's right.
So.
Right, that's the other piece is all of this is public record. Who contributes, who spends, what you spent your money on. You can go pull all my 460s anytime you want. Like they are public documents. So, you know, the answer to this really varies. I would say prior to 2018, I would be shocked if anybody really spent a dime on an Altadena Library District campaign, maybe a couple $100. In 2018, because there were more people running, I know that we had a real range of folks. There were some people who spent no money. There were some people who spent less than $2,000 and were successful. And then there were all kinds of results north from there. And Jason, I don't know what you spent. I will say I raised and spent somewhere in the neighborhood of like $12,000.
Wow. Mine was about 5,500. But I also had what are called some in-kind donations. The labor union I worked for helped me out, especially with voter files. So I didn't have to necessarily report that, but they did. Like they had to report it as an in-kind donation, the value of the work they put into helping me. So that was probably about another $1,000.
Yeah,
So about 6,500 all in. But I think, you know, it goes to Katie's point. It was a competitive election, right? You know, I was making phone calls, knocking on doors, running Facebook ads. And I only won my seat by just under 300 votes after doing all that work, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, who knows what the future ones will hold? Hopefully they'll be as competitive. But again, I think that's also one of the reasons among many why the board is moving to districts, because it becomes infinitely cheaper if
That's
you're
right.
just having to compete within your own neighborhood versus all of Altadena, for instance.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. And there's a, there's sort of a saying in again, in politics, that basically there are three pieces to any campaign, and it's time, money, and people, right? And any deficiency in one of those, like if you've got less time, you need more money and or more volunteers. If you've got a ton of volunteers, you can get by with less money. So it's always a trade-off, right? And all three of those are important, but everybody's campaign is different, everybody's race is different, everybody's strengths are different. So if you know that you've got a ton of people who are willing to step up and volunteer, well, maybe you don't need to spend as much money because you've got that army of people out there knocking on doors and making phone calls and, talking to their neighbors. I mean, I did all the like operational and sort of administrative work, but I definitely have volunteers who helped me. For sure. I had people helping me make phone calls and send texts and get yard signs out. And I had a friend of mine who was helping me in sort of a campaign coordinator role as well, to keep track of all the moving parts. And, it was a lot, honestly. Like, I learned a ton, but I had never really done it before either. So I think I learned a lot as I was doing it, that if I had to do it again, I could probably be more efficient and better organized knowing what I know now.
And just a couple other just pieces of advice on that point. One, you can get voter information directly from the registrar's office for relatively cheap, but you're going to get it in a format that's not, frankly, very user friendly. And so there's a bunch of different groups out there that you can pay to get the data in a much more user friendly way. The one that I used and that I think is most common is called Political Data Incorporated.
Yeah.
PDI in the political world. If you believe your race is going to be competitive, frankly, using PDI is invaluable. But again, costs money, right?
Yep.
And all the other tools that exist out there that are, especially, and again, this gets to Katie's point. I did almost everything myself. I had a couple of friends and my wife helping me, but I didn't have the huge army. So I spent money on things like Hustle, which is an app that allows you to text and communicate with a lot of different people. You can reach a lot of people, but again, it costs money. So that's all the different things you need to kind of account for as you're making these decisions. Where are you going to have resources and where do you need resources?
That's right. That's right. John, I'm sorry. You had a couple other questions. I want to make sure we get to those. So it's a 5-seat board, right, for the Altadena Library District, 5 seats. Right now, all of those seats are elected at large. Until we go through our redistricting process in 2022, this cycle, again, they're going to be at large. So everybody in Altadena will vote. The way that those elections work is kind of bonkers, because you vote for up to 2 or 3 people at a time, and then the top vote getters win. So like in this coming election, an infinite number of people could run. On the ballot, you'll see it'll say vote for 3, and then the 3 people who get the highest votes win. So at-large elections are bonkers and difficult to figure out the math on, versus like I'm just running against an opponent. So you're not running by seat, you're running at large. That's why we're shifting it, because it's like an inherently kind of terrible system. This fall, there are 3 seats that are up. So Jason and I, the reason we're doing this is we're not running, right? So got no horse in this race. So the other 3 seats are up. Right now, those are held by Terry Andrews, Betsy Kahn, and Camilla Wilkerson, who was just appointed to fill the vacancy left by Gwen McMullen. So Gwen resigned in May, and we appointed Camilla in June. So she is an appointed incumbent. Terry and Betsy are elected incumbents. I believe, not to speak for Terry, but I believe he's planning to run again. I know that Betsy is not, so she's not planning to run. That seat will be vacant. And Camila, I'm not sure if she's made a decision on whether she wants to run or not. So there will be 3 seats. Again, you're not running against a particular person. You're just running to be in that pack of 3. When we switch to by district elections in hopefully we can do that by 2022. It'll depend when the census data comes out. At that point, then you will run in a specific district. So right now there are like 34,000 registered voters. You divide that by 5, it'll be, 6,000 registered voters that you have to reach, which is much more doable and like a lot more reasonable. So that'll be different. And then you'll be running just for that 1 seat. So it'll be, if 4 people are running, it's whoever gets a majority of that vote would win. You need to be on my California Voting Rights Act committee because you were asking the right questions, my man. Yeah, no, look, it's complicated. So basically the way the redistricting will happen is we will get the 2020 census data in the spring of 21, probably, if it gets released on time. So like March, April, we'll get that data. Then what we do is we go through a series of map drawing exercises because the law says, and it is absolutely correct, that every district needs to be equal, right? So it needs to have the same number of people, but we also want to make sure that we're respecting things like natural boundaries or, language groups or what they call groups of affinity. So if like you've got a neighborhood that has like a really tight-knit community, we want to make sure that that's not split up in some weird like gerrymandered way. So we'll go through a series of public hearings and we'll set up those maps. If we do all of that right, then the elections in 2022 will probably just be for for 2 of those seats. I don't know which they will be. I don't know how that will impact the trustees who will be on the board at that point. What I will tell you in having talked to demographers who do this process is they try to have as little like disruption of the sequence of elections as possible. So sometimes that means like somebody's term gets extended or somebody's, usually it doesn't get shortened because you get elected for a certain period of time, but they try to make it be as continuous and like as less messy as you possibly can. So those honestly are a lot of really, really good and smart questions that we just don't have the answers to yet. And I don't know how it will go. I can tell you that for anybody who's elected in the 2020 cycle, so anybody who's in one of those 3 seats, they are elected at large. And if any of those seats should become vacant anytime between now and 2024, when that term expires, they would also be appointed at large. So like basically how you come in the door is how you stay. And so basically we phase in those districts over time. It may take more than 1 election cycle to get there. It'll depend how it works. I'm not sure because I haven't seen the census data yet.
I think for me, it's getting to know the community more, right? And getting to know the community leaders. When I ran for office, I'd only lived in Altadena, I want to say 6 years, right? Lived in Pasadena before that. And, getting to feel like I'm more of a part of the community instead of just having an address and a mailbox, right? And then I guess probably second to that is frankly, I just am a huge believer in public libraries and the need for public libraries to be actively engaged in the community. And I think that's even more important in Altadena, where we don't have an official city council and all these other elected representatives. So the library really kind of serves the community in a lot of different ways, and it's just frankly good to give back.
Yeah, I'd echo all of that. I would say for me as well, there's sort of an emotional answer to that, and then sort of an intellectual answer to that. And I think the emotional answer is like, when people say like somebody should do something and they should set it up differently, like, there's always like this amorphous, like they, like, who are those people? Who knows? They probably don't care about me. I probably don't know them. Like I'm they, you know, for some of this stuff, like I'm the someone should do something. And I like feeling like I can hear somebody and then do something about it. And even if I can't solve a problem like today, I can say like, I hear what you're saying and that does matter to me. And we are gonna think about this and try to come up with an intentional and thoughtful and reasonable solution. And like, it really matters what your experience is, right? So that is something that to me, like, I believe in libraries. I believe in the power of local institutions and community and democracy. Like all those things really matter. And that I want to be a part of making that real and making that meaningful. So that's my sort of heart answer. My brain answer is I love policy. I love structure. And one thing that I have been astonished to learn, even in like just my time in the Altadena Library, which is like not the California State Legislature, or any big decision-making body, is like the way in which it matters. Things are policy choices, right? The way you set up things like compensation and leave, and the way you make sure things are accessible or not accessible. Like I care about trying to very consciously dismantle things that are unfair, right? There's structural inequality everywhere. And that was a deliberate choice over many generations, conscious or not, who cares? Like it is there. And so if I can, in even small ways, find ways to think like, how can we make this more fair? How can we make this more accessible? How can we make this like actually help people as opposed to being like one more barrier that people have to deal with? That's something that I find intensely rewarding. And I think like a lot of it feels very in the weeds, and it is, but like this by district thing is a perfect example, right? It is going to be more fair. It is going to be more accessible. It is going to be more representative and more democratic. And that's a deliberate policy choice that we made, because like we all got together and I was like, hey, this sucks. We should do it better. And everybody was like, yeah, it does suck. We should do it better. And now we are. So like, that's cool. That to me is like the whole point of the thing.
You know, specific to the library campaign, look, the trustees was frankly a complete disaster before the election, right? I had been going to the meetings and seeing what's going on, you know, and I frankly started just talking to some of the community leaders and getting a sense for like who's going to run, like who's going to like step up and try to clean this up a little bit. So you know, at the time that I jumped in, I think Katie might have been the only other one at the time that was officially running. But it, you know, again, it was great that by the time all was said and done, you know, we were having debates with 6-7 people at the debate.
Yeah, right? It was a crowded stage. It was great.
Yeah. Yep.
I mean, I'm excited about the redistricting thing, but like I said, that's a very like structural deal that will have an impact, but isn't like necessarily the most impactful like for patrons every day when they're like rolling up to the library. So I think, you know, we have a really unique deal at the Altadena Library because we are an independent special district. And what that means is we can do whatever we want, like that's legal basically, but we don't have to clear it with county or with state or anybody else. Like we can make our own decisions. So as an independent special district, we have an unusual amount of agility and flexibility and like decision-making power for a local agency. Usually libraries are like part of a city or a county government, but not us. We're our own deal. 1927, oldest special district in the state. What, represent. So what we can do is try stuff. And that's like, there's not one specific answer, but a culture of like innovation. Right now, our buildings are closed, you know? So I know that the staff and the director are working really hard on like, how can we get mobile hotspots to people? How can we get laptops to people? How can we get technology into the hands of folks who may not have it during a shutdown when we can't have people in the building, but that's a need? How do we fill it? How do we be smart and creative? That is something I am so excited about because I know we're going to continue to be creative and innovative. And the next couple of years are going to be really challenging ones. Like they just are. No matter what happens from here on out with this pandemic, it's going to be a hard road ahead. And I really believe that our library is going to play a critical role in helping identify and meet needs in really creative and interesting ways. So I'm not excited about the fact that we will have that need, but I'm excited about what we can do to help meet it.
Yeah. And for me, I think, like I said, my whole professional career, I've been a union organizer, right? So by nature, that's how I approach things. Like you've got to go and meet people where they're at. And I think libraries in particular, but frankly, government services overall need to be doing a whole lot more of that, right? Um, and I'm just really excited at the leadership team and frankly, the entire staff of the Altadena Library. It's very obvious that everybody is committed to that principle, right? Like we shouldn't be sitting in the walls of the library, like wondering when is everybody going to come see us, right? And how do we do things and get creative and be very intentional about getting out into the community, right? Um, and so, really excited to see the different programs and whatnot that we're able to do to get there. And I think a lot of it's being done now, even during the pandemic, which is really exciting. So once we get past this, it'll be really exciting to see what kinds of things we're able to make happen.
Yeah. I'd add to that just because I have a lot of things I'm pumped about the library. But one thing that, has come out of our like strategic planning process that's a big piece of this also is building partnerships. And I see that happening more and more and becoming more and more important as time goes on. And, we have a lot of work to do, certainly, to continue to build those partnerships with groups and organizations and other agencies around town and in our area. But I feel like we're really moving on that, and I'm starting to see
Jennifer.
it. Yeah, schools, Jennifer, that's right. But like we're on it, and we're thinking about it, and we're trying to make it happen and build those partnerships. And I think it's just going to grow and have more momentum over time. And I think that's how we become really effective at what we do. Okay, perfect. Well, I want to thank you guys for being here. I want to thank Jason and the staff at the library for making this happen. And for all of you guys who are thinking about running, I just want to encourage you and advocate for you and be in your corner and say, you can do this, you should do this. We need you, we need your voice. And all of us are here to help you any way we can.